Hello, everybody. How are you? This is Patrick J. Brown, your change architect. I want to welcome you to the Change Virtual Cafe, our April edition, and we're excited about the conversation that we're going to be having today. So those of you that are out there right now, please go ahead and start your watch parties. Please share with your friends. Go ahead and tag a few people. Let's come together here at the Change Virtual Cafe, where we have conversations and creative spaces. We've been having these dialogues for about a year now. And we've had a range from authors to thought leaders. Today, we're going to have a powerful transformative conversation concerning building resilience. And so grateful and excited to have my guest on today. We're living in a time right now where people are going from sadness to depression, from anxiety to handling whitewater change, to unsurety and insecurity about the future. And so we're going to have a conversation today that's going to, you really want to dig into this. With Miss Latasha Davidson. She's a community interventionist. She specializes in resilience, suicide prevention, and over 20 years in social services and advocacy. And her experience spans a variety of capacities and a plethora of insight concerning family education to sexual assault prevention and response to veteran support services. Her current work, she leads in violence prevention as a program director and overseeing violence prevention efforts focused on reducing interpersonal and self-directed violence in military communities. So, that's really incredible insight in the resilience sector. She leverages a public health approach to prevention and implements evidence-based research programming and education to a population of over 50,000 personnel, while also serving as a senior leader advisor on community resilience. And today we have her here on the Change Virtual Cafe. Please go ahead and tag your friends. Go ahead and join the conversation. And one of the key things that's critical about conversations, it is about not necessarily just having the conversation, but who joins that conversation, and that'll determine where things are going. We'll be back here in a second with my guest, Ms. Latasha Davidson, talking about building resilience. Looking forward to having you all here too. Talk with you soon. Hello, I'm back. This is Patrick Brown again. Thank you for connecting with me on the Change Virtual Cafe. I'm going to bring forth my guest, Latasha Davidson.
Hello.
So I've been waiting for this time. I'm so glad that you're here. I want to thank you for coming on. And this is an exciting time in the world that we're living in. We need this conversation so deeply and so dearly. And I know that this is important to your heart as well. But since we're in the cafe, how's your day today? What's going on in your world, and what are we going to toast to today?
My day is going really well. As you know, I'm over here in Germany, so we had a little bit of dip in our temperatures, but it is still a very beautiful, beautiful spring day. I've gotten a lot of rest and relaxation, anticipating this conversation with you. So I'm excited about it.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm glad that you're having a good day over there. I know that you're several hours ahead of us. So you're showing resilience even as you're on. And so thank you for just connecting and having this conversation. What are we toasting to? What's on your heart?
I think today I want to toast to strength, capacity, and resilience. Those three things.
Capacity and resilience. All right. Well, let's toast to capacity
and resilience.
Right about now.
How about that?
Yeah. I hope everybody out there, you have your tea, you have your coffee, you have your alkaline water, whatever it is, you're juicing. You want to be a part of this conversation. And Latasha has this expertise and this insight, but also draw from practical experiences working in military communities. One thing I failed to mention was that you are currently, I was going to call you Dr. Davidson, but I know that you're at ABD. For those folks, that's all but dissertation. What are you studying? What are you getting your PhD in? I just want to make sure the audience gets that.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm working on my PhD in human and social services, and with a concentration and specialization in community intervention and leadership. And as you mentioned, I am ABD, all but dissertation. I've completed the dissertation actually and my research study, there's several more layers to the process before I can be officially called doctor. So I am in that process right now.
Okay, so we'll just say pre-Dr. Davidson today, just for those that want to be technical. Now, your research, is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? I mean, which one is it?
I conducted a quantitative study looking at that relationship that already exists between belongingness, feelings of belongingness in community, and suicidal ideation. And so what I did was took that particular relationship, but then put in a modifier. Does social media use modify that relationship? And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it today, but seeing how social media, our virtual connections are playing a huge part in our society right now. So I wanted to look and see if that had any bearing on how people feel that they belong in community, and then does that lead to more suicidal ideation?
Wow, that's outstanding. I'll be looking forward to hearing more about that research. And, since we live in such an integrated, interfacing world of technology, social media, public approval, cancel culture, identity, self-identification, and identity crisis, and identity searching, definitely that has a part in the discussion of resilience as well. I'd like to kick off our conversation about this. Why do we need to have a conversation about resilience? Why is that so critical to where we are, A, as individuals, B, in terms of our community or our collective culture, and then also why do we need to foster dialogue concerning this?
That's a very good question. It's important at all three of those levels, as you mentioned. It's important at those different levels because we need to look at not only our individual ability to be empowered and to continue moving forward, but also as we continue with our communities for future generations, for even what we're doing right now. We need to be able to have these conversations, to look at platforms, to look at programs, to look at just thought processes that are moving us forward. You mentioned before when you talked about the whole cancel culture and just different things that we are seeing in our environment right now. So it's important to have these conversations because as people continue through these different vicissitudes of life, as the folks used to say, as they continue through these different processes, how do we help them to remain strong? How do we help them to continue to get back up again when life has adverse circumstances?
Okay. Well, I would like us to, if we can, and I thank you for sharing and opening that up for us. Let's bring some commonality to the definition or description of, what is resilience, so that we can have a common framework. And all of our guests, I want you to continue to comment in. Let us know where you're from. Let us know what your thoughts are as you're listening to Ms. Davidson concerning this. All right. So let's just set this foundation. Tell us, what is resilience?
Resilience, in a nutshell, is our ability to bounce back. At an individual level, we look at that as individuals go through adverse circumstances, as they go through trauma, as they go through situations in their lives. What is their capacity and their ability to bounce back? From a community and societal perspective, though, we have to look at things that are going on in our communities, and then what is the capacity of that community to not necessarily return to a sense of normalcy, but what is it that we can help them to empower them to move forward within that community. So our ability to help them to move forward and build resilience in that community.
Okay, so the ability to bounce back, and when we use the word bounce back, that means we have the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to recover quickly, to recover.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? Let's look at it from a practical perspective. What does resilience look like? We know what it is based upon the definition you've helped us frame. So based upon that frame, what does resilience look like?
I think if you look at any person that's on the call today, you can look at their lives and situations and things that they have gone through, whether that be with relational, whether it be socioeconomic, whether it be whatever situation they may have gone through. Do they have the ability to pick themselves up by the bootstrap, engage in situations and things that are going on in the community to be able to continue to move forward? So you highlighted that word quickly, And I like that because one of the things we do look at in resilience is that mindset and how we frame things and helping individuals not to stay in that moment of the trauma, that moment of the disappointment, that moment of the situation that happened, but helping them to deal with it and then move forward.
Not to stay in the moment of the trauma.
Ah.
Can you, you said something very powerful with that. Can you unpack that for us? When you say not to stay in the moment of the trauma as it relates to what it looks like?
Yeah, as far as resilience and not to stay in that moment of that trauma, I can give a practical example if you'd like. You can take, I work with a lot of women. I work with a lot of women specifically who have gone through divorce, who have gone through challenges in their lives. So not staying in the trauma looks like an individual recognizing where they are, accepting where they are, understanding their circumstance, their situation, then seeking those resources, seeking support, help, whatever it is that they might need to help them move forward. And each individual person, that looks different for each individual person of what it is that they might need. But it first begins with that acceptance and begins with understanding this is where I am. How do I move forward? I don't want to stay in this place.
So you started out with the word recognize. Then you said accepting, and then I think there was another element you talked about seeking support. So that's so critical. I love what you mentioned about recognizing. That lets us know that, I guess I'll ask this question, since you use the word recognizing and accepting and then seeking support. Does resilience contain intentionality?
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of the key components in resilience is that we have to be intentional about being resilient. It's not something that's going to it doesn't naturally just come for some people. Now, there's research, there's studies that shows, different racial groups, how they have more resilience than others. But it's not necessarily something that comes for most people. When you look at the different pillars of resilience, the mental, social, spiritual, and physical, when you look at those different areas of resilience, it does take intentionality in each of those areas. Just like we talk about with building muscle, how you have to intentionally move and intentionally press that muscle to build up that resilience. It's the same way. It's the same way with overall resilience.
Okay. Let's talk on intentionality. That's critical because that's something that's a self competency, or perhaps that's an intrinsic strength that some people have. Do we all have intentionality, or is it, there could be that question, well, what about people who just can't, they're get up and go, it's got up and gone. How do I deal with that? So what do we do with the lack of intentionality, or perhaps there is a sense of stagnation in not being able to gather that intentionality, or does that exist? I just wanted to just get your perspective on that, like when somebody may feel stuck per se.
When they feel stuck per se, that's where, as I mentioned before, one of those things I mentioned was about resources and support. So we can put that onus on individuals to reach out for resources and support. But one key component of resilience is also that we as individuals reach out and help others. There has to be that key of connection, has to be that key of looking out for one another, because it's proven a lot of us have gone through situations where it's just, I can't get back up. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get back up. But if we reach out, then we can find the tools and the resources that we need. Or it takes key individuals, and I can even mention from my personal life, takes key individuals to notice that something's just not quite right with an individual. And then we reach out. That's the key. One of those key parts of community is supporting each other.
So we established that resilience requires intentionality. So we're going to be intentional. There's a different part of it. Let's talk through those different aspects, because you mentioned maybe a few buckets here. You talked about mental. We talked a little bit about social and societal. So let's first get through the individual resilience. Can we break that down from a mental, social, physical, and even spiritual perspective. And share with us what is individual. We define what it is. We talked about what does it look like. Now let's hone in more on the individual, and then we'll move from there. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. When
Okay.
we're looking at that, yeah, when we're looking at that overall wanting to be resilient, an overall resilient person, there are those four key pillars that I mentioned that individuals should seek to thrive in. They should seek to have that intentionality, mental, spiritual, social, and physical. So when you look at the physical part, that's where you hear and we talk a lot about we have one body and we need to take care of that body. So that physical resilience can look a little bit like we're eating properly, we're sleeping, we're drinking water, all of those things that we try to do practically so that our body and our physical resilience is at its peak. So that's what physical resilience might look like, just as an example. As far as that mental piece, though, one of the things that I really champion in that, and I know I've talked to you about this as well, is that mental health is important. It's a vital part. It's just as important as that physical pillar is our mental health. So
Mhm.
recognizing, and yeah, I use that word recognizing again, that it's just as important as that physical health and individuals being intentional again about leaning into whether that's counseling, whether that's some group programming, whether that's education, whatever it might be to help them with their mental resilience so that we can be as strong mentally as we are physically. And then that social piece, I mentioned it a little bit earlier about that connection and how that's vitally important. We were not made to live on an island alone and not in community. We were made to live and thrive in community. And just a little sidebar to that, when you look at prevention efforts for suicide prevention, violence prevention, those who feel connected in a community are stronger. Their
Mhm.
overall well-being is better. So it's important that we look at those social connections and not just, and I'll say this just from this culture that we live in, having a lot of friends, just having a lot of people, just to say you have a lot of people, you want to really have those relationships that are quality, where you're feeding them, they're feeding you. It's iron sharpening iron, and you are growing and thriving in those individual relationships. And then, of course, spiritual. That's the one that I believe I do have the most intentionality is the spiritual resilience, making sure that we are feeding our spirit, whatever that looks like. I mean, I know with this audience, we can talk a little bit about that, but whatever that looks like for that individual, prayer, reading, fasting, whatever that looks like to help you to increase your spiritual capacity and feel connected to to the Lord, something bigger than you is what we say in the military community, because we don't
Yeah.
want to necessarily push that, but making
Yeah.
sure that folks understand that they do have a purpose and that they're here for something bigger than themselves.
Yeah. I like how you put that as far as the interwoven part of it is sometimes there is a unique focus on one particular pillar. And I like the fact that you call them pillars because those are
Yeah.
foundational. We stand on them, we lean on them, and now we're encouraged to be intentional about not only the mental, but all the other ones. What happens when the intentionality is not there? When it comes to the cross spectrum of the pillars, right?
Mhm.
You have, for instance, you move into a new city, most people will say, hey, I need a new realtor, right? I need to get a new bank person, or I need to find out my dentist, I made a transition. So that's building resilience, right? From a physical, medical perspective. What do you suggest we do when it comes to the mental and the social?
From the mental and the social, it's looking to connect, make those relationships,
Okay.
develop relationships. You mentioned as the example in moving to a new place. I can use that example as well. I moved here to Germany a little over a year ago, and I knew a couple of people from just my time and being around the military community, but I had to be intentional about seeking out other relationships. And usually, practically, that can happen around hobbies, things you like to do, you just meet other people who like to do the same things. But in this environment where we live, especially with COVID restrictions and lockdowns, where it can feel a little isolating for folks at times, there has to be an intentionality about getting out, meeting other people, and developing relationships that are going to be fruitful for us. And so as we develop those relationships, our mental capacity is then increased as well. So it's just extremely important to connect.
Oh, wow. So we've got 4 pillars. Let's give some takeaway for the audience. We've got people from Virginia, Texas, Maryland, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia. So there's a cross spectrum of people that are watching right now. So, but we all have this common aspects, which are the 4 pillars. I'd like us to break those down again, but in a way that our audience can take away. There's an action that you perhaps need to take or some assessing. So let's start with mental. Mental, you talked about mental toughness. What else happens in mental resilience that we want to make sure the audience
when you think about it from a stance of mental toughness, again, I'll always highlight that whole recognition piece, knowing that if there's an area, especially with our emotions, if it's with our mindfulness, our thinking, if there's an area where we recognize that there might be a challenge, or even if someone in community has pointed it out to us, that intentionality comes in when we say, okay, I want to get better in this particular area. So when we've got those 4 pillars, and as you mentioned, it's the foundation. So if one area of that foundation is a little bit leaning, that the whole structure then starts to lean. So when we look at the mental pillar, it's recognizing those areas within our mental capacity, such as our emotions, mindfulness, being able to stay in the moment, those kinds of things that we'll want to lean into and get support and help if we need it.
Okay. 4 pillars. So we got 4 pillars. We're the table. We're relying on this pillar. And mental is off a little bit. Physical is. So we're making sure we're settling ourselves into that place where we're able to, I like to use the word GPS, locate ourselves and be honest about it. So intentionality, so I'm getting from this that intentionality is honesty as well.
Yeah, that's a good word. And honesty, not only with folks in the community around us, but honesty with ourselves. Because a lot of times we can sit and we can think that, I got it all together. I'm doing pretty good over here. Everything is all right. And we don't have it all together. And that's one of the things that I talk about when I speak with women a lot, because we are the masters at wearing the mask and the master at, putting on the facade that we've got it all together and everything is great. And we're dying on the inside. There's something that's off on the inside, emotionally or spiritually. We're struggling. Or it might be that it manifests where we can smile and feel like we've got it all together, but maybe then we are overweight or underweight or challenged in that particular area physically because we're putting so much focus on this other area. So yeah, it is absolutely a balancing. Balancing is important. That's what we're looking at.
We're talking with this Latasha Davidson, community interventionist, and we're talking about building resilience, why and what and how, and what is our process. And you've covered several different principles here today, and this conversation is so engaging. I want to encourage you to see yourself with these 4 pillars: mental, social, physical, and spiritual. And we're the table on those 4 pillars. How are we being intentional and honest about where we are, if I can call it, on the table of resilience? Okay.
Hey, I like that. On the table of resilience.
Maybe there's a few things that are a little bit off balance. I think I'm going to drink to the table of resilience. All right.
Drink to the table of resilience.
I want to move on to the next aspect or pillar, which is the social piece. You said something earlier about connectedness. Can you extract that a little bit more for us? Because you've also mentioned not only connectedness, you mentioned something about not only the person going to get the resources or the community, but the community going to the person.
Yeah.
So what does that look like in a day when we're not connected? We really need to unpack that, because if there is isolation, I like to say to people, you can be born by yourself, but you can't grow by yourself. You come into this world, but growing requires connectivity. If that's the case, and since that is scientifically and human ecologically proven, then how do we as the community wrap around other people?
Mhm. I think, well, primarily when you talk about connection, you're right. Individuals can reach out. They can go out for support and reach out on their own. But let's just be honest. A lot of times people don't do that for whatever reason, maybe stigma, maybe fear, anxiety. I know a lot of times in the culture where I grew up, it was, I don't want nobody knowing my business. What goes on in this house stays in this house, that kind of thing that people might grow up with. So as a community, if we lean into making sure that people are okay, and it's been said it's okay to not be okay, but leaning in and making sure that people feel supported, that if they have a question, if they need anything, and in this day and age, that could be a simple text, it could be a phone call, it could be like, hey, let's just meet up on a quick chat on a Zoom, whatever that might look like. But we have to be the folks that are in our circle, the folks that we know, leaning in and making sure that those people are doing all right.
Mm. And when we're in a culture where there is high tech, there may not be high touch.
Yeah.
And just because we're not touching doesn't mean that we're out of touch.
Correct. I know in the environment where I work in the military community, that is one of the things that we have been really shifting to, is getting to know those that labor among us. It could be work units, and so in an overall community, work environments. It could be church environments, school environments, anywhere that we come in contact with other people, making sure that we make eye contact, say hello, that smile, well, with a mask now, maybe not a smile, but that eye wink or head nod might be the only thing that that person is getting that day that will drive them to knowing that they are connected in community.
Okay. So we're in a culture where not only sometimes there is an onus on me as the individual to be intentional and deliberate, being honest with myself. Then that also opens up, how have I managed my connections?
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to reach out, then does that mean that we as the community must be intentionally driven as a community to move forward with resilience? There's a question, can resilience be taught? Of course, anything you can learn anything if we want to, if we present it. Of course, there's that what's in it for me, right? What's in it for us? So I'm really struggling, but at the same time I'm struggling, because I'm trying to think through, if there's the onus of me as the individual to seek out the community, then what's the message that we send to people when they're weak or when they're struggling? What do we do? How do we build that environment where it's okay to reach out and not have a certain stigma placed on you because of that? My brain is going through that right now.
Yeah, and thank you for kind of breaking it down just a little bit like that, because I don't want to say that that's why I said that the only onus is not on the individual. As a community, we have to build a structure where individuals feel that it's safe to reach out and ask for support. And the way to do that is in our individual connections, in our groups, in areas where we do connect with individuals, whether it's church, whether it's work, whether it's school, whether it's a community activity or something that we're involved in, being intentional about checking on those folks that are in our sphere, checking on them, making sure that they're okay. Do they need support? Do they need help in any way? And reducing that stigma, the way that we reduce that stigma is by when someone does reach out, that we are there to support, that it doesn't become a public spectacle, that it doesn't become this big issue because somebody reached out for support. We just meet them where they are and take care of them as we can. So the onus is not just on the individual. As a community and a culture, we have to make it okay for them to reach out for support.
Okay. I'm going to take a few questions. We have one question that says, can resilience be taught?
Yes, resilience can be taught. If we look at resilience as that overall, and first off, whoever it was, thank you for the question. If we look at it from that, what we've been talking about as far as that intentionality, we can teach intentionality. We can teach that from a framework, and I like to give a lot of practical examples. But when you think about, going to the gym and working out, how many of us have said, you know what, I just don't want to go today. I just can't go today. But we push ourselves and we go ahead and go, and then we get into a rhythm, we get into a pattern. So that's a way of teaching ourselves to go against that resistance. So in every other area, when we look at that mental, physical, spiritual, social, it's pushing ourselves. So yes, we can teach that in resilience. We can teach that intentionality. Absolutely. Absolutely we can.
To go against that resistance.
Mm.
Sharing that incredible insight. Among the 4 areas, and I think we touched on that when we talked about the table of resilience, is it possible to make resilience in one area and not the other?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that's where our table begins to wobble just a little bit. And as I mentioned, you might have someone who's, very spiritually strong, they're active in their community of faith, they are, in the church, they're doing all of these things, yet they're growth, way overweight, they have health complications, they have all of these things going on. So anyone looking at them from that spiritual resilient, looking at that part, oh, they know how to pray and get a prayer through, they know how to do all of that. But on this other side, their table is leaning just a little bit because do they now have the physical capacity to be able to continue what they're doing? So yes.
Okay. So is the goal, in keeping with this analogy, is is the goal to have an equilibrium of the pillars, or to have awareness where your pillars are?
That's a good one. I think it's probably both. We will not necessarily equilibrium, but we do want to make sure. Maybe it is equilibrium. We do want to make sure that we are actively engaged in every area of resilience. We can't just focus on one or two and leave the others by the wayside. We can't do that. Awareness, as you mentioned, definitely is key to that. We have to be aware of where we are. And then that's when that intentionality comes in. Do I want to be intentional in increasing my, for example, physical resilience? Do I want to be intentional on my social resilience and developing key relationships that are going to help me to thrive and to grow? So that's where that comes in. But I would say that, yeah, the equilibrium is part of it, but we definitely want to be aware. Definitely want to be aware of where we are.
Awareness, intentionality. If I'm aware, that means I have to take a step back and look at me. Okay. So if I take a step back and I look at me and I'm assessing me or being evaluative, self-evaluative, what do I need to, do we need to, and I'm using we because we're working on community resilience in our conversation as well. Do we need to take a step back and look at the history of our resilience?
Absolutely.
Look at how have we built it or not built it or understood it? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. We need to take a step back and look at the history as we are going forward. And one of the benefits of taking a step back and looking at the history before we go forward is that a lot of times we are able to recognize where we've been resilient and we didn't recognize that's what it was. It was resilient. I did a talk a couple of weeks ago, and that was one of the first things I had the ladies in the conference to do was to sit and just take a breath in and then breathe it out. And we did that a couple of times. And I said, the fact that you are able to do that shows that you've shown resilience at some point in your life. So taking that history and stepping back and looking affords us the opportunity to not only see areas where we can grow, assess where we are for growth, but it also helps empower us to know that we have made some choices and we've been resilient along the way. So history and looking at it from that perspective is very, very important.
Yeah. I ask that because I think it's important for us to look at our cycles, to look at our patterns individually, but also collectively. I mean, if I can just bring it on home to contemporary American society, right now we're watching a case. And we all know what we're watching right now. This man who was killed and murdered, this black man from a white police officer. All right, not going to go into the whole case, but we know the realities of this man's life being snuffed out of him after 9 minutes of someone's knee pressed on his neck. So how much resilience am I supposed to build through that? My mind goes through this. Well, okay, mental toughness, social, emotional, okay, mental, spiritual. When we look at crisis, something like that, constant non-warfare violence, like shooting up malls and shooting up grocery stores and all the other non-warfare violence that we're experiencing, add the political upheaval and social unrest, and then add the struggles of a pandemic and all the realities surrounding that. What would you recommend from the 4 pillars of resilience? What would be your wisdom on what we can do practically in our homes, in our jobs, and in our spiritual communities?
Very good question. You said a lot there. It was a lot talking about the trials. As a matter of fact, when you even mentioned that, that's been just an extreme challenge for me. Just knowing that it's going on and to even watch any of the footage or anything that's been coming out of that. But when we look at the repeated trauma, when we look at the repeated violence and things that are happening in our community, from an individual standpoint, we've been talking about it already. It's that awareness. It's already looking at where I am. So me as an individual, for example, I know that really weighs heavily on me with seeing a black unarmed man murdered in the middle of the street. And I'll just say it how I'll say it in my words. That really weighs heavily on me. So when that happens, now maybe I need to pray a little bit more. Maybe I need to be a little bit more intentional in that particular area so that I can maintain peace in that particular area. So as an individual, that awareness is key. And again, I can't say it enough. If we find ourselves then at a point of this is just too much, I'm finding myself, I have some friends who, with the COVID restrictions and everything, are having real challenges with anxiety and stress and not able to function very well. And so recognizing that, and then how can I support them first off, and then how can they move forward? How do we help them to move forward? So that awareness is key. So in our churches, what we can do is to continue to not only empower those individuals, but then we have to look at our platform. What are we doing? I've said it from the top of this conversation, connection is key. And it may not, we might be in a removed environment right now where it's a little bit isolated and we have to, do things online. And, I know I do a lot of things being here in Germany online right now, but we have to be intentional in our churches to make sure we're wrapping our arms around individuals. And I know in some of the larger churches that I've been in, for example, again, cell groups, people who are reaching out, touching those who might be homebound, who might be dealing with anxiety and stress and not willing to come out. But that intentionality, again, is key in our churches. So absolutely, there's an individual component. But then when we look at our community and churches, it has to be intentional about, again, connecting and wrapping our arms around people.
You use the word empowerment, and I thank you for that. We're talking, we're hearing a common silver lining here about connection. How do we move to shared values of connectivity through our community? Some people I don't want nobody in my business, or, it is what it is, or, how do we move to help people accept or buy into this empowerment of shared values, how critical it is for us to connect?
If we're looking at it, that's a really, really good question, because if we're looking at it, that is one of the keys to resilience. It's not only connectedness, but a shared sense of purpose. So when we're looking at our communities, we have to be able to look at where we are and then see how we can function within our current system. It was interesting. I read an article the other day where in Chicago.
Hold on 1 second. You said you played with the article. You said, look, you said something powerful. You're flowing here. So this is good. Look at where we are and how we function. We talked about system. What was that?
How we function within our current system. So how is it that we are functioning in our current system? Because when we look at prevention, when we look at resilience and those key things, we have to recognize that most of our prevention efforts, most of the things that we do are at the first level of systemic change. It's at that first level of increasing folks, increasing their well-being, increasing their social support system, helping them to navigate within the system. So then that second that second level that we get to is where we actually that's where we want to see overall systemic change. So that's where we have, policy change, law changes. That's where we're really pushing for that overall systemic change. But what I said, what you mentioned was just how do we help people to function at that lowest level, that lowest level of increasing their overall well-being, social support, their empowerment, how they feel their ability to thrive.
Wow. Okay, thank you. You're flowing there, doctor. I was like, wait a minute, hold on. You gotta take time to chew the cud on that one. Sorry for those chew the cud country term, cows. Anyway.
That's okay. I got it. Gotta chew it. Gotta keep chewing on it for a minute.
I forgot I'm talking to the MHRM Phil ABD.
Mercy.
Look at where we are, how we function within our current system. That is powerful. When we really unpack that and apply that to where we are. Okay, you were moving on to an article that you read. I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to just pause for that. Go ahead and talk about this article and how that relates to where we are. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things, the article that I read, when you're talking about functioning within our current system and where we are, the article that I read was about in some parts of Chicago, how they are actually now training their barbers to be mental health crisis responders. So there's groups there that they're training these folks to be mental health responders. And I know a lot of communities are doing varying things, but I just found this interesting because how many of us go and we're sitting in the salon, you're sitting in the chair, you're talking about problems, you're talking about things. So now if we can empower within our current system, empower these folks to be able to recognize warning signs of someone who may be dealing with depression or anxiety or suicidal ideation, help them to recognize if maybe they're dealing with a domestic violence situation at home. I just found it very interesting that we're functioning within our current system, but we're looking at ways that we can still come back to what you said, coming back to that unifying, that shared sense of purpose. We're all here together. We're here to support you, even if it is just sitting in the barber's chair for 30 minutes. So I just found that very interesting.
That is interesting. And I'm wondering, how do we practically shift that to people who work in corporate contexts? They work in human resource managers. They're working in education, tech, whatever area, right? And the majority of people, through research, do not access their employee assistance programs, their EAPs. Yeah. The information is there, but the connection's not there. The information is available, but so based on what I'm hearing, perhaps the shared value isn't there, and we're stronger than we really realize, but we're even stronger when we're collectively sharing that value together.
Yeah.
And you're causing me to think how we're navigating. So I'm so glad that you said that about looking at, and that's a powerful article. I'm gonna have to go research that. And perhaps it's not even about models per se, but about, again, you said intentionality. Are we intentional in our own spaces, in our own systems? And I got to think about my life and look at what I do as far as a spiritual leader, but also someone that is a corporate leader. And I'm thinking, well, things have shifted. So where am I? How am I navigating? How are my teams navigating? How are my leaders navigating? How are probationers or members navigating in our current system? What is our check-in process? Are we intentional and deliberate about that check-in? And perhaps maybe we're not, because we're working on, us four and no more.
Yeah.
So it just makes me think about that. So I'm glad that you brought that point up. That's a very important and salient point. Can we shift a little bit further? We talked about individual resilience, community resilience. Let's move through societal resilience and perhaps barriers. What's happening from a societal resilience? What are you noticing in terms of potential trends in different spaces? I want to get your thoughts on what you've seen and observed.
Yeah. Our societal resilience is definitely shifting. We've seen, and I talk about it on a regular basis. Where in my employment, we've seen the rise in suicidal ideation, suicidal completions. We've seen the rise in domestic violence and child maltreatment. We've seen a rise in these particular areas because folks are struggling with being able to adapt to the changes that are taking place in our society right now. So as we look at those individual things that I just mentioned off, those individual areas where people are needing support, I think it behooves us as a society to start looking at the reasons why. Why? So that was one of the reasons for my research study was we see all these different things. So why is this a particular factor? Is this something that plays into increases in suicide or increases in not feeling like individuals belong in community? But to answer your question, that's the trend that we have been seeing. I don't like to focus on that all hope is lost and look at the glass is half empty, because I do still see it as half full. But those are the trends that we've been seeing.
Yeah, and it's important to look at trends. It's also to look important to what's happening so that we can take a step back with intentionality and start seeing the value of us coming together. Well, one of our viewers is saying now, I want to read this, and then maybe we can address this in relationship to perhaps what we were talking about in community resilience. It says, I love using our employee assistance program and found a Christian counselor there. But when it first came into my workplace, the leader I was under at the time used EAP like a weapon against people, saying, end quote, you seem to have a challenge with XYZ, you need the EAP, end quote. I wanted nothing to do with it at that time because of the stigma. We've got to do better for people. Absolutely what we're talking about from a community care perspective. If I am pursuing self-care, then we need to have community care along with it.
Absolutely.
Because if one person is coming in, and I encourage people to use the EAP, I've had losses, I've had death in my family, and then we just keep working. See, here's the reality. You matter most. You really do.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I leave, something happens to me, my company's going to say, oh, let's just split up his deliverables. Well, he's gone. We're mom. All right, let's split up his work, his deliverables. What's the status of Patrick's work? He's on, is he on green, is he on red? Is he stalled? Is he moving forward? Let's dip into work. Let's go to his house and see if he has antiques. I mean, all kinds of
Just get his stuff. Just get it. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And so we have to be incumbent upon us, not have to, but it's wise for us to take a step back and look at how are we both in community and self-care, which again goes back to your number one point about intentionality. What is our intent?
Yeah. And I kind of want to speak a little bit to the viewer's comment about using mental health counseling, using those services as a weapon that then dissuades folks from going and seeking support, as they mentioned. And in my environment where I work with the military community, that's one of the key things. Individuals are afraid to go seek support or reach out or say anything to their leadership because of fear that this is going to ruin my career and I'm not going to be able to go forward. So they're struggling with these challenges in silence, struggling, by themselves because they don't want to reach out. So that's one of the platforms that we are working heavily in the environment where I am, and I'm hoping that it extends, to the larger community, is removing that stigma and helping folks to understand. And it begins with those who are leading us. Because as the viewer just mentioned, the leader is the person, not the individual. The individual wanted support. The individual wanted help. So now then that becomes a community education issue where it's not a stigma, and we as leaders have to empower our individuals, the folks that work for us and the folks in community with us, to be at their best self. Best self.
So employers and leaders, and I wish we had more time to break open employment empowerment, which is a word that many use about empowerment. But do leaders really know how to empower if there's not the intentionality of resilience? And that's a deeper conversation we probably need to have. Because those empowered, yes, we need to have empowerment. I'm all for that. Yet, there's, because of the nature of self-E, we're not we, because we're in self-E. So when we're in self-E mode, I mean, you got a generation, if you help somebody across the street, they're going to open up a GoFundMe.
You're right about it.
A couple of people across the street, LLC. So I think it's important, this is a good conversation, to talk more about solution-based, evidence-based, research-based empowerment. What does it look like from beginning to implementation to sustainability? And not necessarily just solely in the job, but just as a community. Go right ahead. I apologize. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. That's no problem. I was just gonna just jump on what you were saying, that it not only building that empowerment, but helping other individuals to know that it is not necessarily, since you are a leader, that you are the holder of all the knowledge, and that you understand. One of the interesting things when we look at suicide is that a lot of times we've targeted young individuals between the ages of 21 and 24. Well, I'll tell you, Patrick, that is no longer the only demographic that we're seeing dying by suicide. It is running the gamut. So if we focus all of our efforts on these folks that are so-called our subordinates, then leaders are not getting everything that they need, because a lot of them are in peril and struggling and having challenges as well. So empowerment on the spectrum. Empowerment needs to be on the spectrum.
Let's look at a couple of comments from the audience, if you will, and I wanted to just acknowledge what we're seeing in questions. Great leaders need to empower and support the employees they serve. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Something you mentioned, and I want to just bring it back up here again. You talked about, as the leader, you are not the holder of all the knowledge. Thank you for bringing that to our attention as well. Here's something else. Great leaders need to cultivate a culture of trust, encourage, and operate in resilience. All right. Here's another comment here. Great leaders empower and serve their employees. So there's shared responsibility. There's collective responsibility. We talked about mental, physical. We talked about social. Let's jump into the spiritual resilience. All right. And then there's a few other questions that we want to be able to discuss too. Here's another comment. Empowerment needs to be on the spectrum. Yes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We probably need to have a follow-up conversation, because there's, people use empowerment, but what does that really look like when we say that? We got to empower people, or people empower themselves, or is it both and, or is it either or as it relates to resilience? So this is important. Here's another comment. Let's go through these. In large organizations, especially educational entities, establishing a culture of resilience must be a priority. Thank you. And then there's questions we'll bring forward in a moment. I want to address the question, go back up here. This relates to particularly American culture. What do you say to those who say culturally Black folks have always been resilient, and because folks know it, they can use it as an excuse to misuse and abuse the Black community?
Oh, wow. That's a big one. That's a big one. It has. So what am I going to say to individuals who might try to exploit the fact that African Americans have been seen as more resilient. I would say that we can't look at it again as just all that is exactly what it is. We can't look at it that way because we have seen research that shows a lot of times individuals, especially African American women, we are not as resilient as we put forth. We are not taking care of ourselves the way that we should. So what I would say to those individuals who tend to lean on African American folks thinking, oh, you're so strong, you can handle it, you got it, that's not the case. That there needs to be a shift, and that I think that's a larger conversation. Needs to be a shift in how we view strength, how we view resilience, because in my work environment we talk about it a lot, with me being an African American female, how things might shift a little bit in the workplace based upon some of my other counterparts. So it's a larger conversation, but I think that I would just let individuals know that it is not always the resilience and the strength that you think that you see. It's not
Mm,
always that.
mm. And of course, that's a loaded question, and it's a loaded truth and loaded narratives in those questions, and so I think it's incumbent upon us, like you're saying, to go back and redistribute our understanding or redefine what that means. So thank you for asking that question as well as for the answer to it. Let's move on and to get. Did you have something else to share?
I just wanted to make a caveat, make an addition to that also, is that as other people see folks, African Americans in particular, as being so strong, then as African Americans often buy into that belief. And so now we buy into, and then there's this strong person mentality that we think we have to be strong. We can't show any weakness. If we do show weakness, oh my gosh, that's the end of my career. That's the end of my relationship. That's the
Wow.
end of this social connection. So it's interesting how that can be permeated, that thought can be permeated, and then we now take it as fact and belief and act it out in community. So
Mm.
just interesting.
Well, we're going to have some more dialogue about that.
Praise
Wow.
God.
This is good talk. We've got 3 minutes left, but I'd like to continue just a few more because I really want us to move to the spiritual resilience piece. Again, folks, if you're out there, I'm talking with Ms. Latasha Davidson, a community interventionist, a resilience practitioner who's in Germany currently, and also completing her PhD. In some depth research concerning areas like this. And so I just want to thank everyone for participating and being a part of our conversation. If you'd like to contact Latasha, I'm going to leave her information up here on the screen for you. You want to further the dialogue, some consulting work that she does for organizations, I would encourage you to reach out to her. She does have a practice. She's developing some perspectives and thought leadership concerning the area of resilience. I would definitely encourage you to contact her, bring her in for some conversation to help begin to facilitate design around this subject. All right. So let's move forward to the spiritual resilience part of our conversation today. We've talked through individual resilience, community resilience, and not comprehensively, but definitely practically, contextually. And we know what the barriers are, I think, in terms of access to resources, people's perspectives and belief systems. But now, as we relate to spiritual resilience, in light of what we're experiencing right now, what would you like our audience to consider as it relates to integrating spiritual resilience with the rest of the pillars in the table of resilience?
If we're coming from my specific platform of who I am as a woman,
Yes.
I think that spiritual resilience is paramount right now in this season. I really believe that whatever community of faith individuals move in, that they do need to lean into their faith at this time. I've said before that I'm a woman of faith. I pray, I surround myself with folks who are strong in their faith, and that helps me to remain strong. And so in these times where we see so much trauma, so much violence, so many things going on, it's imperative that we are leaning on the Lord. And I'll just say it, that's my stance, leaning on the Lord and leaning on something that's larger than us. Because the fact of the matter is, Patrick, we we can't do it alone. So we
Correct.
have to lean in community where spiritual resilience is concerned.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add, as a man of faith as well as a follower of Christ, that how critical it is for us to see each person as an image bearer. You
Yeah.
know, I was thinking as we were talking from a spiritual resilience perspective, because we know that's our foundation, and what we draw our strength from to bounce back. That's how I got over.
Yeah. Yes.
That's how I got over. And how I got over, I think when we look at Genesis 1 and 26, it talks about how humanity, we were created male and female in the image and after the likeness of God.
Yeah.
And so when we see ourselves as image bearers, or those that are in the image and after the likeness of God, then we will begin to treat people as if they are also the image and the likeness of God. We wonder why people are so quick to go and kneel on somebody's neck for 9 minutes, because they didn't see that man as an image bearer. Why? Perhaps he didn't see himself as an image bearer, because an image bearer will never abuse, misuse, and kill and murder another image bearer.
Yeah.
It's the lack of people understanding who they are. When we understand that people are image bearers, there's a way that we'll treat people.
Yeah.
When we understand people are image bearers, there's a way we'll connect. So when I look at spiritual resilience, I look at it from a perspective that we are all created in the image and after the likeness of God. And when we are in systems that prohibit and inhibit us from seeing ourselves, whether it be narratives, meta narratives, subcultural perspectives, and the like, religious as well, when we do not see each other in the image and after the likeness of God, then we will have a difficult time fostering resilience. And I think perhaps a shared value is we are image bearers.
Yeah.
When we move into that, perhaps, maybe, possibly, we might be able to reach people in a way. So, last few points for us, Miss, for the audience, Latasha. What would you like to share? Any other perspectives as it relates to our 4 pillars, or perhaps barriers or points of resolution that you want to share for leaders?
We've talked about a lot today, and I thank you for bringing up that point about being an image bearer and how we need to convey that in our communities. It starts with us, as just even if it's just one individual, to see those that we come in contact with as bearing the image of Christ, as image bearers. So thank you for bringing that up. My final point, and it's my foot stomp that I say anytime that I speak, is that connection is key. I think I need to just have that word somewhere around me at all times. Connection is key. And so I will empower leaders, I'll empower individuals who are watching today, that they need to make connection with individuals that are in their sphere. If they are a leader and they have a spirit, they have influence over other individuals, it's important that they reach out and make connection with those individuals. That's the only way that we are going to be able to help individuals become resilient, is that they, one, know that you're available and that you want to support them and to help them. So my final thought is just connection. Take care of each other. Reach out if it's something that you have a question about or don't know. There's always someone willing to help. I firmly believe that, if you are intentional about reaching out for support.
Thank you so much, Latasha. That's for your insight, perspectives, helping us navigate through what is resilient, what does it look like, what are the pillars, what we need to do. And it started out with you're telling us resilience requires intentionality and connection is key. And we'll start making adjustments. We'll become even more self-aware. So again, thank you for being on my Change Virtual Cafe. This has been an incredible, insightful, and practical conversation. For those of you that want to contact Latasha, I'm going to put her information up here on the screen. Please email her at ldavidsonconsulting@gmail.com. ldavidsonconsulting@gmail.com to contact her. I would definitely encourage you to do so, to really seek out her thought leadership on resilience, perhaps in your community. in your business function or your nonprofit or your system would have it. And again, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and I look forward to future conversations. For those of you that have been following me, Patrick Brown, here on my Change Virtual Cafe, please continue to follow me on all of my social media outlets. We definitely are going to continue to have these conversations. We have another one powerfully planned for affirmation for women for the month of May. I'm looking forward to that dialogue. It's going to be rich as well. And if there are other types of subjects you'd like us to cover in our Change Virtual Cafe, I look forward to your ideas and your perspectives. Again, I have a blog. It is at realchangematters.com. That's realchangematters.com. Please visit that, as well as for those of you that have not ordered my book, Change Matters, you can find that on iampatrickbrown.com/store. And I'll put that here for those of you who perhaps have not ordered my book. And again, thank you so much for the time. Thanks to everyone for being a part of this conversation. This has been incredible. And Latasha, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Patrick. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, everyone, have a very good day, and we'll see you soon. And remember, change matters. Have a good day. Bye-bye.